Hello, everybody, and welcome to another quick walkthrough of a couple of various digital marketing skills and techniques. Today, I'm going through how to start building a website. You'll notice this is the first time I'm using my boom mic. This is a brand new piece of equipment that I just started integrating. So if you have any issues with sound, please let me know. I'm going to try to watch this ahead of time, although I hate watching myself. Making sure that it works, specifically making sure that the audio works. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here on how to use really one of three main website builders that exist today that people use. And those three are Wix, Squarespace, and WordPress. On Wix and Squarespace, I've just started some basic sites here. These are just basic templates. There's nothing really built out. On WordPress, I do have my business website pulled up here that you can see I will use as an example as well. With WordPress, it's kind of hard to start from scratch in that you can use a template, but you do need to do some work up front. So just as a way to show you some examples, I didn't want to show you a totally blank site. That is one advantage to both Squarespace here and Wix. So I'm going to take myself off of the video while I go through this because I am going to walk through a couple of things here, and I don't want this microphone to be distracting here as I talk. So let's go through a couple of different websites that we have here. First, to dispel a couple of myths, we have, as you've seen, as I just showed you, there are two websites that are pretty much already built. There's Wix and Squarespace. Both of these websites, these programs, do not require any sort of coding from you. You do not need to be proficient in HTML, although it helps. And you certainly don't need to be able to develop a website from scratch like you've seen in a lot of TV shows and in movies where you see developers spending hours and hours building a website. That is all false. You can get a website up for yourself, up and running within probably 30 minutes if you were really resourceful, and if you had an idea of what you were doing and what you're looking for. And that's another thing to consider. When you look at websites, and I'll just use my brand's website as an example, you need to have an idea of what you want your website to look like. I spent a long time building this website a couple of years ago because I didn't really know what I wanted it to be. And I ended up really kind of diving in and spending a lot of time building this out. And you'll see on this website as well, it's pretty straightforward. There's nothing really fancy to it. I put a lot of effort into forms. I spend a lot of time focusing on my target audience, but you will see there's a brand. I have a color palette. I have a font family. I have some basic stock images that I put in the headers because I don't have enough time to take fancy photos myself. But the big thing is that I really focus on a consistent look and feel. And that's what's really important before you set out to build a website. Whether it be a portfolio, whether it be a company website, whether it be anything else, knowing what you want the website to look like is really important. And if you don't know what that is up front, that is perfectly okay. You can kind of make it up as you go. It's just going to take you a little bit longer than it would take if you already have a vision for what it looks like. Now, I could walk through the whole long spiel of, you need to create a wireframe and you need a sitemap ahead of time. And to be perfectly honest, those are all great when you are working for a web development company and that you're strategizing for an existing business that might already have a website. But if you are honestly just starting a website for the first time, or you are trying to get something like a portfolio up and running, chances are you're just going to be starting here from scratch. And I recommend just messing around in these programs and getting something up that you like. Knowing what a wireframe, and just to rehash and to recap from the first part of the semester, a sitemap is the actual layout of the different pages, like what the home page is, how it is in relation to all of your other pages. And at the same time, a wireframe is what the page actually looks like, but without anything designed. So a wireframe of this page here, this is on Squarespace. you would just have a rectangle at the top. There would be nothing drawn. There'd be some random text here for the actual heading. Headline, you have a button and then some sections. Again, there's no actual content here. It's more of just a look and feel. That is a wireframe. I don't expect people to go through and spend hours building wireframes. Those are more for those larger organizations that are building complex websites that have dozens of wireframes for larger companies. Another myth that I quickly want to dispel is that you need to buy a domain ahead of time, and no domain being the URL. Honestly, all three of these, Squarespace, WordPress, Wix, they all let you buy a domain up front when you design your site. And usually they're pretty cheap, to be perfectly honest. It's like $10 a year. I think it depends on what kind of domain you're looking to buy. So here, you'll see you can connect the domain on Wix, for example, or you can just buy one right here, right? So if I wanted to take my name, sure, I can just connect one here. And a lot of times, like it'll come with the package that you purchase. So you do not need to use GoDaddy, although I do like GoDaddy and have connected to my site itself. You can just go into the website builder itself, buy a domain right there and have it registered there, and you'd be all set. There really isn't any downside. I'm sure GoDaddy would tell you otherwise, but there's really no downside to having a domain living and breathing on your website. There is an extra step if you don't. If you buy a domain on GoDaddy and say you bought one a couple of years ago, that's your name or something, and you decide now, hey, I want to take this domain and I want to go ahead and connect it to my Wix site, which you would do here, right? Which you have to upgrade for. That does take a little bit of work. You do need to mess with the DNS settings just a bit in GoDaddy. And if you don't know what that is, it is something that you're going to have to look up. So it does take a couple of extra steps. Whereas if you were to actually just buy one on Wix, well, that's a 30-second thing that you're all done. The other thing that I want to dispel, though, is the fact that a website is free. And honestly, if you want a website with your own domain, it's not free. All of these things, all of these different platforms have a price. Squarespace, for example, I think you can get away with about $100 a year. Wix, not sure off the top of my head, but it's similar. With WordPress, I spend $300 a year, but that's also a larger business account where I have some additional customization that is added into my site. And if you go back to the homepage here, I created this template myself. I took a template and I totally revamped it. I added a larger image. I redesigned what the middle section is, and I spent a couple of bucks. But if you look at something like WordPress, it will cost you a little bit extra to get access to additional templates. Whereas with Wix and with Squarespace, you have all these templates at your disposal. So you'll see my website subscription expired here with Squarespace. So if you want to take a look at the pricing, again, I'm used to paying on a business one, but on a personal note, you could do what, $14 times 12. So you're getting out of there in under $200 per year, which honestly isn't bad. You get a free domain, which is usually $10 a year. SSL security, which is essentially the difference between HTTP and HTTPS. HTTPS has that security, that certificate, and you really need that these days because Google is looking for that, or else your site may not even get indexed. It'll get indexed, but it's not going to rank as highly on Google. Google doesn't want to put unsecured websites on their SERPs. So just keep that in mind. Unlimited bandwidth, that's not a problem when it comes to Squarespace. Video storage, I would think you don't want to store video on your site and that you would rather just embed a YouTube video or something else. And again, I'm just running through these really quickly so that you can see the main differences. When it comes to a personal site, unless you have a developer and you plan on selling stuff, you really don't need to you're not going to need anything that business offers. Business offers customization, fully integrated e-commerce. if you do have a store and you're trying to sell product, that is a different discussion and a very different video. And I'm not going to get into that in this course. But if you do plan on doing that, I encourage you to reach out. I'm happy to discuss that with you in more detail separately. Well, let's go into the actual building of the site first. Again, I'm just comparing the three of these. I'm not actually going to go through and build one because honestly, a lot of it is trial and error and it's just getting experience with how to build a site. So to me, the easiest is Squarespace. I think this is absolutely the most foolproof website builder on the planet. It is so easy. I put together this thing really quickly. I'm at a point where I can't really I can't do much with it because my subscription expired, my free trial, if you will. But the important thing to know is that this is all customizable. And these are just used through blocks and they're very easy. I think Squarespace has about 200 different templates that you can use. Now, the big advantage to Squarespace, obviously, is how easy it is to use. But you'll see based on the layout here, it takes a little bit of work to make it more businessy, if you will. By default, Squarespace was created as more of a portfolio website builder. I mean, that's what it's called. Nick's Portfolio. I did not call it that. It just gave me that title to begin with. This again is just how it exists here. This is the template. I didn't do anything to this template. But yes, you can make it a business website. And yes, I've done this before. But with Squarespace, for example, if you're a B2B company and you are providing consulting services, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you to customize and make this site look more business professional than, say, the other two options that I've pulled up here. Squarespace is great for personal websites, for cheap and easy sites that you can get up and running quickly. If you want to put your resume on a website, Squarespace is ideal for that. But if you want more customization and you want to be able to do a little bit more, you're going to want to look elsewhere. That's where I come to Wix. You'll see here, I just created a quick thing here. Wix has a lot going on here on the menu. You can get a site set up pretty quickly. You can skip these things and whatever. Now I will say the editor on Wix that I am going to show you, Wix has templates just like Squarespace and WordPress. But I would argue that the Wix editor is the most challenging to use of the three. A lot of people swear by Wix. They think it works great. I think that's phenomenal. That's great. But the two big problems with Wix is one, it is not by default a responsive designer. If you look at my site here, and did not mean to do that, and you expand it, it by default is gonna become, it's responding to my resizing. See, it is responding to the resizing, and it gets to a point where it looks ideal at a certain width. Wix is not that way. Wix offers you two views. There's the desktop view and the mobile view, which is great because you can really, you can design for mobile first, which is a principle of this course, which is great, and they will look great. The problem is that tablet mode, if you're looking at a Wix website on an iPad, for example, the website might not look too great. And that's really because with Wix, you have almost too much customization in that you can design everything on desktop, but then you're going to have to go in and review everything on mobile to make sure that it still looks good. You often end up having to remove big features, removing photos, removing buttons, perhaps. Sometimes you even have to remove a background image depending on how the text looks on top of it, because with Wix, lots of customization here available to you. But at the same time, it's almost, you have so much room to work with here on Wix that it doesn't take much to mess things up. Like, it's just like, it literally is drag and drop, where if you wanted to put the about thing over here, you can. Now, what is that going to look like on mobile? At the same time, the issue here is that things don't move together. So a lot of times you're going to want to get familiar with the keyboard shortcuts here, and say you want to move all this text together. You're going to have to, for example, hold down the shift key, and now you can move everything as an element. Right now, I don't know if I'm center. I think I'm center. Things like that. So again, Wix. A lot of people swear by Wix. They think it's great. It is a good product. I have built websites on Wix before, but honestly, at this point in my career, if I run into a Wix site, I just have to say pass. I work more with WordPress and Squarespace myself. But again, lots of templates available, and this template by design is just another portfolio template. But Wix can still work pretty well with businesses and with consumer sites and portfolios. If you're creating a portfolio, honestly, I would recommend Squarespace first. Squarespace doesn't have quite the customization options because you're often stuck within the confines of the template that you select. But it's also easier. And generally, if you're setting out to build a portfolio, you're not trying to spend hundreds of hours customizing the look and feel. Chances are you're trying to get something up, and it's more about functionality rather than beauty. And if you are looking for something that's more about gorgeous, and you want to really show your style and the way that you communicate and the way that you want to look and feel, then Wix is the site for you. From a business standpoint, e-commerce wise, Wix is still good. Probably the biggest thing about Wix that I like is that they have a whole set of apps. I don't know how many apps they have. They have a lot. And there's all sorts of stuff you can see right now. There's a ton that are really good, but a lot of them also cost money. Having said that, there are a lot of free apps. And if you were to say, you want to put some, not the booking, you want to go with online store. And you search online store, you can get all sorts of e-commerce opportunities here. Wix stores is good. I've used that, and I've used online store. They're both okay. Honestly, I would recommend something a little bit more robust. There's a lot. There's a lot of online store apps available. Again, they both work. I think it's simple. Yeah, Simply Commerce is pretty good. But again, it's definitely a challenge. It's not something that is going to be something where you just add the products and be done. You're going to need to spend some time integrating and see what is the product page going to look like? What's the category page going to look like? And then what's the store homepage going to look like? Those are all things that you're going to need to figure out up front if you are actually building a website with a store. And none of this includes the whole fulfillment piece. What happens when somebody makes a purchase? Does it, by default, Wix is going to send you an email, and then it's up to you to get the product to them. And so you're going to need to have your logistics process in place so that you can determine, okay, what happens when I do get that order in my email? How am I going to get the product to them? Is it something that they pick up where the onus is on them? Or is it going to be something that you're going to have to actually get delivered out? That all depends on your preferences. So that's Wix at a glance. And then finally, we do have the good old WordPress. WordPress has been around longer than both Wix and Squarespace. I think it was started in the late 90s. I don't remember exactly when. And I've used WordPress since I was in high school in the early 2000s. And I think it's got that, it walks the fine line of customization and also ease of use. And what I mean by that is, like with Wix, I think there's too much customization where I can often get bogged down in the details, and then moving things around can become kind of challenging. WordPress is on the flip side a little bit easier to manage templates. And I'll show you what I mean by that. To be perfectly honest, the best part of WordPress are the plugins. And you can pick one of hundreds of plugins that will allow you to properly edit and update your website. And when I scroll down to plugins, for example, again, I don't spend a lot of time on this website. I spend maybe a half hour every couple of weeks reviewing. But you'll see in the plugin store, like there's thousands of them. Not only are there thousands, although like they show, like if I show you my list of installed plugins, I've got probably a dozen plugins on my site that more than a dozen plugins. I have all these plugins added to my website and they're all free and they just make things easier. They are very easy for me to utilize. They're easy for me to see the benefit of, and none of them cost me any money. I can connect my Google Analytics account pretty quickly. I use a template program called Elementor, which I can show you kind of how that works, and that just makes it easy for me to design my pages. Let me see if I can pull up an example here. Customize my appearance. This is what I'm, it's still loading. Something like this is what a lot of people who use WordPress are most happy about. And that is the ability to customize the layout of the website and what the pages look like with just a matter of clicks. There was a time back in the day where WordPress required you to make all of these changes in the code. And that was really what made WordPress difficult to use. At the same time, WordPress has always been by default more of a blogging website. And what does that mean? But it really is optimized for blogs and for written content. And you can add plenty of e-commerce things through plugins. You can add pretty much anything you want through the use of a plugin. And here, what the way that I use my customization tool is that you can update your logos, you can update your color schemes. You can like I have sections on my front page, my homepage. There's the color scheme. There's body colors, links, headings, like all the way down to sidebars and footer credits. I have widgets. You know, what widgets uses is probably not something that's really necessary. That's like sidebar content. There's homepage settings, so you can display what your homepage is, and you can change what the homepage is. This is all through the Elementor plugin, which again is one of the most popular template visual design plugins that there is. But that's really kind of an overview of what it looks like. But going back to how WordPress started as a blog first and foremost, if you are building a website and that your number one thing is to share your thoughts through a blog, I would recommend WordPress first and foremost. The blogging functionality that exists on Wix and Squarespace are both pretty subpar, to be perfectly honest. And those are more built on the ideas of visual identities and portfolios. Squarespace obviously is number one for portfolios. Wix, I'm not really sure what their sweet spot is, to be perfectly honest. I see it as just a more customizable Squarespace. But if you're doing e-commerce, honestly, if you're doing e-commerce, I might recommend a Shopify instead of WordPress. But if you're going to have any blogging element where you're going to be optimizing for search, any SEO efforts are going to be best done through WordPress. You have there's entire companies like Yoast, for example, Yoast SEO, which was entirely built for WordPress. This is a multi-million-dollar organization that is based out of Europe, and they made it big because their number one thing was to build a plugin for WordPress. I have a theme, you know, I consider WordPress to be pretty straightforward, but again, it's really what you want to get out of your website and what you are looking to get, like what the goal long-term is. Whatever you do, I would encourage you to pick something that a platform that you can see your site on as it grows. You need to pick a builder for your website that is going to work 5, 6, 7 years down the line. That's not to say you should never redesign your website. I think the average lifespan of a website before getting redesigned is about 4 years. But it's a lot easier to redesign a website with its current infrastructure in place than it is to completely start over and build anew on a different platform. And that is why I think it's important to pick something that you'd like to use into the future. Squarespace, Wix, WordPress, they aren't going anywhere. They're not going to go away at all into the future. I think the three of those will exist indefinitely. You have other builders too, like Weebly, that are even more foolproof. It's like a dumbed down version of Wix. You can try using that as well. I mentioned Shopify before. Shopify is really good for e-commerce because it also adds in some logistical elements that all of these others do not inherently have. And then there's always the more developer-friendly ones, Joomla, Drupal. Those are more for enterprise level sites. And if you get hired into an organization as an entry-level digital marketing person and their website is built on one of those, chances are you're going to go through a robust onboarding and training with those, but they're all custom. None of them are out of the box. And that's because larger companies have larger budgets, larger teams, and just more content to put on their websites. Again, this walkthrough is more for if you're looking to build one for yourself. But that's about it. You know, there's nothing here that you can't Google yourself as well. And honestly, when it comes down to it and you need to do something and you're looking for something, you're like, man, I can't figure out how to where'd the editor go? Well, if you would you could quickly Google it, and, you know, Squarespace would say, hey, you can't actually edit your website if your website subscription has expired or your free trial is over. Maybe you could get a new free trial for 7 days and go in and edit it yourself. So that's the overview of building your own website. I recommend checking it out. If you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to me. I am available for any questions you might have. And, you know, that should about cover it. So hopefully this captured some of your questions and this helped answer some of your burning questions. And the number one question, everybody, I get the most is, what should I use? And hopefully I've provided some answers to that there. So that is all for today. I'm going to be creating a couple other videos depending on how this audio quality works. And if you have any other questions, please, or comments, or you'd like to hear more about any of these, feel free to reach out.